They thought Earth was dead, but it was only silent, waiting for the galaxy to be ready to hear it. One signal awakened thousands of vaults, and humanity reclaimed the memory that was stolen from it. Now, the archive lives in everyone who dared to remember. Stay with us to find out how the story ends, and don't forget to subscribe. The last signal from the Kesson Reach came on a whisper band. Carrier wave barely stable, buried under bursts of radiation from a dying relay moon. It carried no formal headers, no recognizable metadata, just one phrase, sent in Terran standard across all known sectors. They've reached the threshold. We failed. Run. Most dismissed it as pirate bait. A few stopped what they were doing and stared at their consoles just a second longer than usual. Only one ship turned toward the coordinates. The Fallbreaker. It was an ugly ship. Not because of damage, though it carried its share plasma scoring on the hull, stress fractures in the outer plating, blackened control panels held together with magnet clamps. It was ugly because it wasn't meant to be beautiful. The Fallbreaker was old. Pre-Accord era. Human-built, when function came first and fear came second. She had no name in Coalition registries. Her crew didn't file flight paths. Her engines burned in a rhythm long abandoned by modern vessels. But she moved like a weapon that knew why it was forged. And at her helm sat Commander Iria Kor. Once a Terran naval officer. Once the leader of a failed uprising. Now a ghost. And she just heard something no one was supposed to say out loud anymore. The threshold. When Earth collapsed, it didn't fall quietly. It didn't burn in the sky like stories claimed, and it didn't beg for mercy. It simply shut off. Communication ceased. Outposts blacked out. Defense satellites went cold and silent, their orbit decaying as if gravity itself had given up on the species they protected. The Coalition declared it over. A failed civilization consumed by its own myths. What they never knew, what they never wanted to know, was that Earth hadn't died. It had closed the door. But some things never stay buried. And someone had opened it again. Kor's crew was small. By design. All veterans of the lost colonies, scattered remnants of humanity that never bowed to the Coalition's integration edicts. No two came from the same sector. No two shared blood. But they all shared the same scar, the one left behind when Earth disappeared. There was Drin, the engineer with a voice made of static and rust. He didn't speak unless something was worth breaking. There was Wes, whose eyes had once been stolen by Avarn and Bishop and returned laced with refractive code. She saw through lies like stars through cracked glass. And there was Kor, who remembered what the Coalition had tried to make her forget. The Fallbreaker arrived at the edge of the Reach on the third orbital cycle after receiving the signal. What they found wasn't debris. It was empty. No ships. No satellites. No stations. Just one planet, once called Neris, now renamed Threshold Beacon in ancient Terran archive code. No one had been allowed to use that designation in over 500 years. And yet, someone had etched it into orbital space using high-energy grav sculptors, long-range pattern arrays used by First Vault engineers. There was only one reason to use that signal. The vault was open. They landed in silence. The sky was the color of dying copper. The structures they found were geometric, brutalist, half consumed by sand but humming faintly, like bones still remembering how to stand. No living beings. No corpses. But Kor felt them. The kind of absence that vibrated in her back teeth. The hum of presence removed forcefully, memories erased while still clinging to the stone that held them. And then she saw the sigil. A broken triangle intersected by a line of fire. It was Terran, a symbol from the last era of resistance. From the Volborn. She hadn't seen it since the day Earth fell silent. She reached out, and the sigil reacted. Not with light. With sound. A voice, old, distorted, genderless, echoed from the ground. You have come too late. The threshold has been crossed. They're awake. The vault is no longer ours. Dren found the entry hatch buried beneath a pillar. They breached it in 6 minutes. Inside, a stasis crypt, long abandoned. Dozens of pods shattered from within, not opened, burst. Whatever had been inside, it hadn't walked out. It had crawled. Wes found blood. Human. But mixed with something else. Something laced. And in one corner, they found a handprint burned into the wall, blackened by thermal discharge. The hand was small. Child-sized. In the center of the vault was a pillar. Floating. Spinning. And in its orbit, 12 data keys, terraced rings covered in ancient archive glyphs. Each one marked with the Terran Delta. Each one glowing. Kerr stepped forward, and the pillar stopped. A beam of light struck her chest, scanning deep. Then a phrase emerged from the air. Terran Authority confirmed. Reclamation incomplete. One archive key remains. And then, Earth must decide. The beam snapped off, and the pillar went dark. Kor turned away slowly. We're not the first here. Dren looked up. No, but we might be the last. And far above them, unseen, a satellite reactivated. Not Coalition. Not Terran. Something in between. Something that had waited for someone to cross the threshold. And now it turned toward Earth. The reactivation signal didn't pulse like traditional comms. It shimmered. A wave of subquantum distortion that rippled through gravity wells and threaded itself into resonance bands, old Terran tech, designed before waveform encryption was outlawed. The signal jumped across dead relay points like a spark seeking dry leaves. Its destination, Sol. More specifically, Earth, which hadn't answered a signal in 517 years. Until now. At the edge of the heliosphere, buried in orbit beneath a collapsed orbital ring, Sentinel Array X-0 woke up. The system had no name in modern maps. It wasn't in any coalition registry. Its last known transmission was a single line of text. Do not come back unless you are ready to carry the cost. But now, a signal had been received. And so it opened one eye. Not a lens. A consciousness. Not sapient in the way humans are, but aware enough to remember what was taken and what had been left behind. The Fallbreaker's crew didn't know about Sentinel X-0. They only knew the vault wasn't empty. The recordings they found in the shattered crypts weren't just logs, they were warnings. Broken voices played on cracked terminals, whispering. We failed to keep them asleep. The last child burned the seal from the inside. Do not unlock the Delta key. Earth will see. Earth must never see. Wes sifted through the fragments, patching together sequences. Each playback left her shaking, her enhanced vision filtering ghost images across the walls, flashes of thin figures standing in vault corridors, too tall, too symmetrical, with smiles that never touched their eyes. These weren't Terrans, she said finally. They were supposed to be. Kor stood beneath the still pillar. It hadn't moved since scanning her. But she felt it. The pressure building around it. The attention. Something far away, something watching, was waiting for what came next. And that something wasn't Coalition. Wasn't Terran. It was what the vault was built to stop. And someone had let it out. On the surface, an old Coalition drone passed overhead. Black, silent, dead. Or so it seemed. Until its underbelly opened and released a spore, a small, luminescent seed that embedded itself into the sand and vanished. Within seconds, ground-penetrating sensors across the vault began to distort. Dren picked it up first. His fingers twitched as he scanned deeper into the substratum beneath the vault. There's something growing, he said, frowning. Not roots. Not tech. Thought. Kor didn't look surprised. They're rewriting the planet. The Coalition had failed to wipe Earth's technology from the galaxy. What they had succeeded in doing was scattering it, burying it in fractured vaults, separating the archive into so many parts that no one civilization could ever piece it back together. But they hadn't accounted for human resilience. Or human grief. And grief, when buried too long, becomes fuel. The vault beneath them wasn't just a shelter. It was a fuse. And someone had lit it. On Earth, Sentinel X-0 scanned the incoming pulse again. It matched Delta key resonance. A code last used during the Collapse War, when the Delta projects had gone dark and the memory storms had turned entire cities into silence. The array calculated options. There were only two. 1. Reopen the Earthline. Reactivate the Prime Archive. 2. Maintain quarantine. Let the outside burn. And then, for the first time in centuries, the Earthline flickered. A single word escaped the cradle of the planet. Just one. Observe. Back on Threshold Beacon, the vault began to change. The pillar turned red. The data rings around it detached from their orbit and spiraled outward, forming a holographic map. A galaxy, but not as it was now, as it had been, before the Accord, before the fragmentation, before memory had been labeled dangerous. At the center, Earth pulsed like a living thing, but it was dimming, and from the edge of the spiral came a new symbol, foreign, malformed. Wes tried to isolate it. The symbol twitched under her gaze, trying to imitate known language, trying to fit, failing. Kor stared at it, her hands cold. They're learning to be us. Dren muttered. That's not a symbol. That's a question. And then the vault spoke again. The archive must be made whole. The cost is identity. The price is self. And then, Earth remembers. Do you? Above them, the sky began to change. Clouds spiraled unnaturally. The planet's crust shifted, tectonics twisting in unnatural ways, bending geometry like it was only a suggestion. And in every compass, in every sensor, in every heartbeat, a direction formed. Southwest, to something older than the vault. Kor looked up. It's not just a memory. It's a doorway. They traveled southwest under a sky that didn't spin right. The planet shifted beneath their feet, not seismically, but subtly, unnaturally. Magnetic north bent 23 degrees in a single hour. Wind patterns reversed every 40 kilometers. Dren's equipment pinged time drift discrepancies of nearly 1.2 seconds per kilometer. Space was stretching in increments too precise to be accidental. They weren't walking across terrain. They were walking into a design. The map projected by the vault pillar had pointed to a scar in the crust. Once a mountain, now hollowed and sunken like something had erupted upward instead of falling in. Locals never went there. The few who had never returned. They called it the throat. When the Fallbreaker's crew arrived at the ridge, they understood the name. The crater wasn't lifeless. It breathed. Not metaphorically. The ground literally rose and fell with slow, long exhalations. Dust flowed in rhythms. Dead trees leaned in unison. And at the center was a door. Not sealed. Not locked. Open. Waiting. The markings above the threshold were Terran, but wrong. Wes scanned the symbols and shook her head. They were written by something that knows our language, but doesn't speak it. These aren't words. They're impressions of words. Core stepped through. The others followed. Inside was darkness. Not the absence of light. The presence of unwelcome. But Core wasn't afraid of the dark. She had grown up on the outer vault worlds, places where sunlight came once a month and silence lived in your bones. She pressed forward, past the static in her neural uplink, past the failing feed in her visor. And suddenly, they stood in a chamber. Impossible. It was bigger than the crater, bigger than the mountain, bigger than the planet, by any physical logic. But here it was. 12 pylons rose in a ring. At their center, a shape suspended midair, constantly shifting. Data, voice, heat, vibration, language, all compressed into a bleeding knot of meaning. It was not Terran. It was trying to be. Wes dropped to one knee, gasping. They're inside us, she whispered. Not thoughts. Patterns. They're testing our memories like a puzzle. Core turned to Dren. Options. He simply held up his scanner. It was blank. No signal. No feedback. Nothing. Not tech, he said. It's before tech. And then the voice returned. It didn't speak into ears. It spoke into presence. We came when you forgot yourselves. We came when your vaults cracked. We are not the enemy. We are your reflection without anchor. Give us the archive. Or become us. Her laughed. Actually laughed. The sound cracked through the chamber like thunder. You want our memory? She stepped toward the core, defiant, shoulders squared. You don't know what you're asking. She gestured at her chest. Memory hurts. It scars. It doesn't fold neatly into your tidy little lattice. She pointed at the others. We've watched our worlds fall. We've buried our names because the stars told us to forget. But we didn't. Not really. It stayed under our skin, in our breath, in the way we sing lullabies we were never taught. The voice hesitated. Then, you protect pain. Why? Wes stood, teeth bared. Because pain tells us what matters. The structure shuddered. The air vibrated. And then the knot at the center began to unravel, not collapsing, but unfolding. From within, images. Not projections. Moments. A child standing in a garden that never existed. A soldier cradling a dead comrade under twin suns. A mother whispering a name into a void pod before sealing it forever. They were memories. Real. Taken. Stolen from vaults long since broken. The shape had fed on them. Try to understand through them. And it had failed. Because remembering isn't copying. It's living through. Core reached forward. The knot trembled. And then, contact. Not data. Not sound. A feeling. Terror. Not from her. From it. Because in that instant, the shape saw everything in her mind. The collapse of the Delta Vaults. The betrayal of the Terran Outer Fleet. The final, silent message from Earth that no one had understood. When they ask you to forget, do not. Even if it burns. Especially if it burns. The knot screamed. Not audibly. Through everything. Across the stars, faint signals echoed, dormant archive nodes flickered. And on Earth, beneath the silence of the Sentinel rings, the Prime Archive stirred. Its systems flared once. Just once. A phrase bloomed in orbital light, visible from above Sol's dark side. We hear you. And the knot, afraid now, spoke again. We only wanted to help. Her narrowed her eyes. You wanted to replace us. And she stepped back. And said, tell Earth we're coming. The descent back from the throat was not marked by silence, but by song. Not sung aloud. Resonance. Suboral frequencies, hummed by the walls of the tunnel itself. The deeper they had gone, the more the stone around them had started vibrating, tones that matched the neural signatures of the Fallbreaker's crew, frequencies designed to bypass cognition and settle directly into memory. They hadn't just visited a chamber. They had walked through a machine built to reshape minds. And yet, it had failed. Because it underestimated what Terrans were made of. Not DNA, not code, but pain that refused to die quietly. Outside, the world had changed. The sky had gone completely still. The vault light that once shimmered in thin lines across the planet's surface now glowed bright and wide, an activated web, connecting ancient Terran archive nodes beneath the crust in real time, sharing what the core had seen. The planet was now awake, and it was sharing everything with Earth. Core stood atop the ridge with her visor off. The wind against her skin was dry, electric, filled with dust and static, but she breathed it in. Wes sat nearby, her refractive eyes glazed over, running diagnostics through the network of low-band memory echoes. It's moving, she whispered. What is? Core asked. The archive. Wes raised her head. It's sinking, rebuilding. She pointed to the western sky. A satellite, black, unlit, dormant for centuries, shifted position. A low shimmer passed over it. Then another, and another. They weren't coalition. They weren't Terran. They were empty archive husks, once seated to observe and record. Now reawakening, not as tools, as witnesses. On board the Fall Breaker, Dren sat at the primary relay console, watching the pulses rise through the system like veins beneath skin. His hands were trembling, not from fear, from recognition. These signals, he said through comms. They're older than the Vault Wars. Core responded. How old? Pre-Accord, Dren muttered. Pre-Earthfall. This is Founding Era. He paused. No. This is Seed Vessel Tech. Wes froze. You're telling me these vaults, this planet, it's one of the first? Core closed her eyes. Not a threshold world. A keystone. They weren't just remembering the past. They were standing at the foundation of the archive itself. And someone, or something, had tried to override it. That meant Earth wasn't just listening anymore. It was calculating what it'd do next. Back on Sol, the Sentinel array around Earth shifted orbit for the first time in 5 centuries. Its outer ring unfolded like the petals of a steel flower, revealing the core transmission lattice that had remained locked since the fall of the archive. The ring broadcast a signal, not wideband. Directional. It pointed at Threshold Beacon. And in orbit, the empty space where no coalition probe had dared to remain now filled with light. Not ships. Not drones. A structure. It formed itself in real time, pieces of memory lattice materializing from archive quantum blueprints. It wasn't a weapon. It was a gate. But not for travel. For transmission. Because Earth had remembered something the galaxy had forgotten. Stories move faster than fleets. Core and her crew stood beneath the sky as the beam touched down. Not fire. Not light. Words. Ancient Terran dialects. Languages that had died with their last speakers. Stories once spoken at the founding of Earth's outer colonies. A million voices, threaded into one signal. We buried our truth. And truth does not rot. It waits. You have found it. Now speak it back to us. Core stepped into the relay circle at the edge of the beacon. Every implant in her system lit up. Every archive shard in orbit turned. And she said, we were meant to die quiet. We didn't. You told us memory was a weapon. We made it a map. We remember you, Earth. And we remember what we are. There was no reply. Just warmth. A pulse through every archive strand in the system. Earth wasn't speaking back. It was crying. At that moment, across thousands of hidden worlds, buried vaults bloomed to life. On shipwrecks floating in void. On moons without names. In data fragments carried in implants of exiles who'd never heard of Terran blood. They all lit up. They all said the same thing. The fire still lives. The fire was no longer metaphor. It had form. Every vault across the sector, long dead cores, failed implants, broken echo engines, ignited in synchronized resonance. A network of memory lit up like constellations born anew. Planets that hadn't heard from Earth in centuries now pulsed with fragments of archive code, each signal a story clawing its way back from erasure. On board the Fall Breaker, the comms array began to bleed voices. Real ones. Human. I was there when they burned the songs from our schools. My mother whispered the names of cities into my sleep so I'd never forget. We didn't die. We hid. And the hiding is over. Wes tried to filter the signal feed but couldn't. The system wasn't overloaded. It was refusing to prioritize. Because every voice mattered now. Coalition observers in nearby sectors picked up the flux. Most dismissed it. Some didn't. On a Varnan carrier 3 systems away, a cultural AI meant to suppress non-accord languages spontaneously collapsed, mumbling a Terran poem no one had taught it. On a fringe world under tight Dominion control, an atmospheric regulator reconfigured itself into the musical tones of the Terran Archive anthem, a song no one had heard performed in over 400 years. Earth hadn't broadcast war. It had broadcast self. And now the stars were listening. Dren stood at the heart of the beacon, watching as the final key, the 13th ring, descended from orbit, lowered on a beam of coherence light. It locked into the terminal pillar like it had never been removed. A hum began. Not loud. Not frightening. The sound of everything coming together. He looked at Core. Do we know what this does? She shook her head. No. She paused. But Earth does. And then it came. The final transmission. Not words. Not commands. A memory. Injected directly into every archive-linked mind, wherever it lived. Core staggered. Wes dropped to one knee. Even Dren, modified and memory-hardened, trembled. They saw it all. The original archive launch, when Earth first seeded the stars with fragments of culture, of voice, of feeling. They saw the betrayal. The Accord's decision to fracture it, to scatter vaults, to control identity. They saw the fall of Terran unity, the silencing of soul. And then, they saw the last message from Earth's prime archive. A woman's voice, barely holding together. We cannot protect memory, but we can protect the ones who carry it. If you find this, you are the ones we trusted to begin again. The beacon began to shake, not from instability, from activation. The 13 rings spun, each one casting light upward. A spiral, a signal, not to Earth, from Earth, to the rest of the galaxy. In Dominion command relays, chaos bloomed. AI filters collapsed under the sheer emotional density of the signal. Fleet leaders barked orders only to find their command structures looping in confusion, crew members frozen as childhood memories surfaced, songs they had never sung, faces they had never seen. The signal wasn't attacking. It was unlocking. The coalition scrambled to reassert cognitive sovereignty across its border systems. Too late. On over 200 worlds, Vault Echo protocols triggered. Hidden archive seeds sprouted. Resistance songs began to play in public squares, reconstructed by AI historians who hadn't known they were carrying them. Citizens wept, and the message burned across the stars. You are not broken. You are only unfinished. Atop the beacon, Kalen Strin's name lit the interface. Wes turned to Core. She's the final piece. And Core understood. It was never about saving Earth. It was about answering her. Kalen's signal arrived not on a ship, on a pod. The same one launched from the first failed vault centuries ago. It landed beside the beacon and opened in silence. She emerged barefoot. No armor. No weapons. Just eyes that had seen the inside of Earth's forgotten hope. She approached the core, placed her hand on the final ring, and whispered, "We are the archive, and we're ready to remember again." The sky changed. Not in color. In tone. The constellations shifted ever so slightly. The stars, themselves, realigned. Not physically. Historically. And from Earth came the final phrase. "Welcome back." The stars stood still. Not truly. Not in motion, but in meaning. For the first time in half a millennium, the constellations weren't just light. They were language. The archive had reawakened across the galaxy, and with it came the ancestral patterns of Terran memory, encoded in everything from song structure to gravitational drift. It wasn't that the universe had changed. It was that people could finally see what had always been hidden inside it. The beacon on threshold shone like a second sun. All 13 rings rotated now, not in perfect symmetry but in layered rhythm, echoing old Terran pulse signatures, used once to stabilize planetary identities before the Vault Wars. Aboard the Fallbreaker, Core stood at the viewport. Earth's light pulsed across space. Not laser. Not gravity beam. Memory. Shared, not projected. She whispered, "It's not just the past. They're giving us the future." In systems that had outlawed archive history, people flooded back to once-buried ruins. On Ganos 6, a coalition prison was repurposed into a living library, its walls rebuilt using the AI-carved dreams of its former prisoners. On Valenspire Station, a boy born in silence walked to the center of a public square and sang a Terran lullaby that had never been recorded in that system. Yet everyone around him joined in. They didn't know the words, but they remembered. Wes sat at the edge of the beacon's ring, eyes closed. "I feel them," she said softly. "Not the vaults. The people." She saw names unfolding in light. Not labels, declarations. Each memory reclaimed was a beacon in itself. And Earth? It didn't demand allegiance. It didn't claim dominance. It simply said, "Tell your truth. Let us witness it." Kalen Strin walked the vault halls in silence. She didn't issue orders. She listened. To old echoes now harmonized into coherence. To languages once stolen now rewritten in defiant poetry. To pain, no longer weaponized, but woven into stories of survival. When she finally spoke, she addressed not just the crew, but the galaxy itself. "They told us we were a threat because we remembered. But we were a threat because we cared about what came before. And that caring was contagious. You can't erase humanity. We were always more than flesh and fire. We were memory set in motion." Above Earth, the Prime Archive no longer spun alone. Other worlds had joined it, not physically, but through light lines threaded through the deep weave of space-time. The archive had become a constellation, one that sang, in 1,000 voices, all different, all necessary, all real. In time, the coalition fractured, not with rebellion, but with awakening. Its citizens stopped asking what to fear. They began asking what had been taken from them. And with that question, the unraveling began. Not in collapse, in choice. Each world chose what to reclaim, what to honor, what to carry forward. And Earth smiled in silence. It had waited long enough. Elias Core was remembered not as a warrior, but as a witness captain. His name became a title, spoken before archive readings. By the light Core remembered. And the fire he refused to bury. We add our voice to the archive. Kalen's name vanished from official record, because she asked for it. Her final message. The archive is not a monument. It's a path forward. No one walks it for glory, only to make sure it stays open. And Earth? Earth never reopened fully, because it didn't need to. The archive now lived everywhere. In station walls etched with refugee stories. In orbital gardens planted with the DNA of extinct Terran flora. In lullabies shared across species, shaped by languages born after Earth went silent. A child on a distant fringe planet once asked, "Where is Earth?" Her father pointed to the sky, to the place where the first story was kept safe. Then he tapped her chest, "Into the place where you'll carry the next one." She smiled and whispered, "I'll remember."